Today on the Patrick Coffin Show, we're going to talk about art and beauty and ugliness and definitions. We're going to go upstream into faith and culture with artist Jonathan Pageau. You're going to love this show. I can't wait to introduce him to you and to go deep into art and iconography and all the implications thereof right here on the Patrick Coffin Show. Coming up next, don't go away. Welcome to the show. Patrick Coffin here. I was introduced to this week's guest by my four-time guest and friend, Dr. Jordan Peterson. He said we'd really click, and I've visited his website, Pageau Carvings, and I've loved it. He graduated with distinction from the painting and drawing program at Concordia University of Montreal. And after a period of disillusionment with contemporary art, he discovered the evangelical power of icons and traditional Christian imagery as he made his way on his journey toward the beautiful and away from the ugly. Since 2003, Jonathan Pageau has been carving a wide array of liturgical objects that have been commissioned by churches, bishops, priests, various communities across the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia. My fellow Canadian, Jonathan Pageau, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, I just want to honor Jordan Peterson, who said you two would really connect here, and I'm sort of tardy getting back to you to connect, but I've appreciated your art, and it's very interesting hearing your story. How you let's start with the hammer incident, the unmentionable hammer incident, where you almost destroyed all the work that you'd done in disgust. Maybe we can start there, and we'll go up.
Yeah, I studied in fine arts at Concordia University, and at that time I was an evangelical Christian, and as I was working through the program, I was always trying to reconcile my faith and my beliefs with the program, and it became such an obsession. And also, in a way, also reconcile it with my being a Protestant. It's
Yep.
Especially evangelical. It's not easy to reconcile making images and also being an evangelical if you're taking it seriously. And so
Yep.
I was trying to just reconcile all of that together, and I was having a horrible time. So much that the subject of my art was that question. So basically, I was making art about how can a Christian make art in the contemporary world, and how can an evangelical make art being an evangelical. And it was this self-referential thing that was really actually ended up being rather, it was good to mull through it, but it wasn't going to give anything fruitful. And the last day, it was so funny because I was really working hard. I actually finished first in my program. But the very last day, my last evaluation, the professor who was kind of my mentor, who was kind of in charge of the painting and drawing program, she sat me down and she said, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here. You should go to seminary or something."
Oh, I see.
She understood that what I was trying to do, which was trying to somehow connect Christianity, connect my faith, connect my worldview with art, it just wasn't going to happen. And she understood that I was basically wasting my time. And so, I was, like 20 or 21 at the time. So it just rolled off my back, obviously, because how cocky you are at that age. But after a while, as I was actually trying to continue to make art on my own in my studio and feeling it more and more difficult to kind of get things to fit together, and also realizing to what extent contemporary art is a social clique, and it's actually more about personal relationships and how you're connected to this or that other artist or this or that gallery owner or this or that person, who has power. And so realizing all of that at the same time, finally, I said, okay, enough. I got rid of my workshop. I just said, I'm going to have a job. I'm going to just work in an office and I'll be a regular guy. I remember my wife, she just laughed at me when I said that because she knew that just in terms of a person, there's no way I could sustain that forever. And it's then slowly as I then, having gotten rid of everything and now in a way being free of the constraints that I'd put on myself, that's when I started to discover traditional Christian art, and especially medieval art, which as I discovered it, felt like it was really a powerful visual language that was created to communicate the truth that it was communicating. So the form and the function and the symbols and everything, even the style, came together to communicate that.
I'm going to put the in the show notes at patrickcoffin.media your website, Pageau Carvings. It's just so folks listening right now don't have to wait till the end of the show. Pageau, pageaucarvings.com. Just a visual feast. I mean it. Your stuff is so it's just arresting. It's simple. It's not jazzy. There's no neon, but it's unless you are working on a neon.
I would be surprised if that would happen. I would have to fall on my head quite hard before something like that.
That actually, neon might be an irredeemable medium for art. I don't know. There's neons in hell, that's for sure. Absolutely, with Miami Vice type wet street reflections, along with demons with pitchforks.
Right, exactly.
Well, let me touch back on your Protestant upbringing, and I want to say this delicately because it reminds me of a conversation I just watched on YouTube with my friend Bishop Robert Barron of Los Angeles, whom I've interviewed many times, and he was on stage with Dr. William Lane Craig, who's got a double PhD in philosophy. I've also interviewed Dr. Craig. He's one of the guys that Richard Dawkins will not get into the ring with to talk about atheism, and the topic of beauty came up, and Bishop Barron's brand, you could say, is talking about the evangelical power of beauty. And he likes to quote the line from The Idiot, the Dostoyevsky novel.
Right.
Back in the 19th century, he said, in the future, man will be saved by beauty. And you can tell Dr. Craig, who's a very good man, this doesn't compute. The idea of introducing beautiful things with an evangelical premise. Even if it's not a picture of Jesus, the idea that something is beautiful and it has order and it has a kind of a deep resonance. It's very hard to articulate this. That can touch the heart in a way it kind of circumvents the intellect. Now, I don't think there's a rich Protestant tradition of this visual arts of statue. I mean, we identify statues so much with Catholic or a capital O Orthodox. But if anyone listening has ever been to a museum in Europe, it doesn't matter what city, it doesn't matter how gnarly the other pieces of art are in that museum or that gallery, there's going to be at least one and often a bunch of depictions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. She's got to be the most painted person in history. Am I off on that in the history of art?
At least of what we have, I'm pretty sure that would be true.
It's like magicians are judged on how well they do the cups and balls. I'm a magician as well. You got to have a good cups and balls. So in a way, the Blessed Mother is the standard by which artists are judged. Do you have a Madonna? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Was that the case in Concordia? I mean, was there some nascent respect for art that we might look at as religious, or not at all?
No, not at all. The thing with contemporary art is that this is something that I think a lot of Christian artists need to understand at a very profound level, is that modern art, but especially contemporary art, is the way that it's structured. It is removed from what it's trying to do. That is, there are steps of either irony or comment upon something. And so you're not actually doing something. So you can't make a straightforward representation of something. Is impossible. Oh, it's possible, but you're not going to go anywhere in contemporary art if you do something like that. You have to have these steps of irony, these levels of irony, or these levels of commentary on what you're doing. And so people who do that, they think that they're being very smart. But there's also an alienation which goes with doing that. And so the idea of representing, let's say, Christ in a straightforward manner, with only the purpose, like you said, of presenting the person of Christ or presenting the person of the Mother of God, and the power that they are to the world, that does not exist that does not exist at all. The only version of that now that somehow exists, the authenticity, are for moving out into the margin, like moving out into the exception, so you can show a weird exceptional person, like some kind of a, let's say, like a kind of sexually ambiguous person. You can do that straightforwardly. Like anything that is not normal, you can kind of show in a straightforward way without irony. But anything that represents order or truth or beauty, all those things cannot be represented straightforwardly. And Christians, they struggle with that all the time. And what happens is that when they try to make contemporary art, they usually make very bad contemporary art, because it just doesn't follow with what contemporary art is.
Or they feel the need. It's like Christian storytellers. They just have to have a Jesus figure. Someone's got to die for someone's sins in this story, or it's not worthy of the glory of God, rather than getting out of that self-referential model and just producing something beautiful.
Well, that's that's the two sides. Let's say those are the two sides. The two sides you pointed out. One is the contemporary artist who is ironic, who is always making fun in a strange way of what they're representing, who's distancing themselves from what they're representing. And then there's, let's say, the kind of evangelical movie, like you said, where basically it's propaganda. And so what we're trying to offer is to say, no, it doesn't have to be either of those two opposites. And the Christian church has developed a powerful tradition of architecture, of art, of music, which is neither of those, which is really this streaming of beauty, like you said, which just hits you and is uncompromising and is not about saying something in terms of a direct message the way that you would if you make a sentence, but it goes deeper and it kind of hits you at the deepest part, and that is really that quote when we say the beauty will save the world. It comes from Dostoyevsky, but the reason why we use that quote today is actually because Solzhenitsyn used it when he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And to understand that he would say that man who lived in the Gulag, who was tortured and who saw so many people tortured, and who would say that no, it's beauty that will save the world, adds so much power to that truth.
In a recent talk that I watched you give at I think it was a former homeschooling conference in the Northwest. You were talking about art, and you showed us a slideshow. I don't want to give any attention to the artists, but some of them I went, ugh, PFFT, pfft, like the Pope with a meteorite or a stone, the cops upside down. It reminded me of Roland Emmerich, the Hollywood director, who's got a weird, kind of ugly art house, and he's got all these ironic pieces, including St. John Paul II sitting absurdly underneath his stairwell, and he's kind of looking up like an idiot. This is not where am I going with this? This is not something that Islam or Judaism has to deal with. There's no depiction of Christ from Andre Serrano to Robert Mapplethorpe to the whole army of anti-Christian animus that comes through the art. It seems that the Christian faith is the particular target over and over again in ways that Islam, you can't even draw a cartoon, even a well-meant depiction of Muhammad, let alone. And when was the last time you saw, Moses or one of the prophets being mocked to sort of attack Judaism? But Christianity, open season, nothing too outrageous. Yeah,
but I think that to be forthright about it, like the reason why that is really because the threat is coming from within. That is, it's a decomposition of Christian culture itself. The European history and let's say the West, which was Christian, then turned against its own tradition. Christ told us that the idea of Antichrist is particularly Christian. We know Christ told us that's how it's going to happen, is that out of Christianity, or kind of, let's say, at the end of Christianity, the spirit of Antichrist will manifest itself. So it's not surprising that it's happening, because that's just how Christianity is supposed to lay itself out. But the question is, as Christians, how then should we react to that? How can we be aware of what's happening and understand and be able to identify the spirit of Antichrist and then be able to respond to it in a powerful way? Not necessarily a reactionary way, but I think the best way is to create works that touch people, that when they see them, they can see the authenticity. You don't have to talk about it. They can just encounter it. And people are so hungry for that. People are so hungry for authenticity. They can be cynical and they can be sarcastic, but everybody wants to find something that's real.
As you're talking, I was thinking about a phrase by Christopher West that encapsulates something important. He uses the phrase "twisted mystics," meaning someone out there who otherwise would remind you of someone who's progressive sounding or potty mouth, and yet they have these lightning in a bottle insights. Maybe they were mugged by reality. And one of them you mentioned is Gavin McInnes, another fellow Canadian. Lots of potty words, very gnarly. It's like the echo of his Vice days are still there, but he's had something of a conversion and loves telling people about being a Catholic, and he's pro-life, and he used to be an atheist and so on. But he keeps this kind of teenage sex comedy lingo thing going.
Yeah.
But that has helped build a tribe. Another one might be Camille Paglia, the lesbian feminist lapsed Catholic, whom I have an email friendship. I'd love to talk to her about
Really?
about her new book. She's pretty ensconced there in Philadelphia.
Academia. Yeah.
And maybe even Jordan Peterson, who's an unlikely candidate to be the most sought-after #1 book in the English-speaking world. But he touched something, and he touched it from a very unpredictable angle that resonates across class, across religion, across even both sides of the political aisle. This twisted mystic idea. Go ahead.
There are quite a few of these characters. I mean, I think that you could add Steven Crowder, you could add Milo, you could add a bunch of these weird characters. If you look at the way they talk or even their lifestyle, there's something which is off about it. But somehow it's as if, I talk about this in my discussion, the one that you were referencing, the idea that it's something about the mystery of the resurrection, something about how as Christianity dies, as Christ dies, there's this trick somewhere in death where things are coming back up, and that it's not clear what that looks like, and it can look like something of a strange aberration. I always mention that in the story of Elijah, in the story of Elijah, the world is upside down, and you have the Israelites worshiping a foreign god and being submitted to a foreign queen, and and everything, all the values are upside down, and so Elijah appears as this freak. He appears as this freak character, and he's shouting out and he's saying all these things. So he is actually the way the world is going to come back up on its feet, let's say. But if you look at him, if you look at how he appears, he actually appears as being the inversion of the world. Like he looks as if he's upside down from everything.
The prophet's
but he's
the
actually the one who's bringing things back. And even his name, because his name means Elijah the stranger, which is the weirdest name in the world. Because why is he a stranger if he's the prophet of God? But it's really this idea that the world has become totally upside down, and so someone who looks upside down has to bring it back. And so it seems like we have people like you said, all these people that you named, it seems like they're playing that role in some strange way. We need to be attentive and also be able to, as Christians, be able to then speak into that and kind of help people move forward and move on to something else. Like you can't stay, as much as I find Gavin hilarious, you can't just spend your life watching Gavin McGinnis videos. At some point, you should read the Church Fathers, you should attend liturgy, you should do those things.
But doesn't it go to St. Paul saying, the eye cannot say to the ear, I don't need you? Gavin is hooked into a narrative and a worldview that gnarly millennials have never encountered before. Even the name of his new show, Get Off My Lawn, that just captures the Archie Bunker nature of someone who used to be, far left, who had a kind of a moral conversion to a more stable. I don't like the term conservative. I think the brand associated with the word conservative is kind of tainted. I like preservative.
Preservative.
But there's an analog here to Hollywood, and this is something I talk about in my talks, and I want to write this down somewhere, and that is what I call the inadvertent incarnational principle. If you look at the big money maker movies, the ones that kids at UCLA and USC and the New York Film Schools teach you, the golden age of cinema. And a lot of these movies tell stories that inadvertently retell the gospel. A more modern example from the 90s would be Robert Rodat's Saving Private Ryan, directed by Spielberg. Well, what's that about? Well, it's on the surface, it's a World War II story about a rescue. But the fact that the title is Saving Private Ryan and not extracting, not retrieving, and it's not saving General Ryan or saving Major Ryan. The whole mission is for the least important guy on the totem.
Yeah, and so going to get the lost sheep, basically.
This is the lost sheep. It's the 99 are leaving to get the lost sheep. And of course, Tom Hanks' character, Captain Miller, hides his identity as our Lord hides his identity in the Messianic secret. And then we learn he's a teacher, and he gathers these apostles/soldiers. And it's in the end, as he's expiring, he lets his pistol run out at the Panzer tanks, and he looks up at Matt Damon's character and he says, "Earn this." And that's when there's this beautiful super close-up of Matt Damon's iris, and it pulls back. And I thought that the old guy at the beginning of the film was Tom Hanks. But of course, no, it's the guy he saved. Then he goes to his wife and says, "Tell me I've been a good man." In other words, tell me I've earned it. Well, I'm sorry. That is a low-density retelling of the gospel, the Incarnation. He's sent from a higher authority to go behind enemy lines. E.T. is another example. The first Spider-Man movie is a ringing endorsement of celibacy. Give me a break. Spidey's taken up to the tall building by the Green Goblin and essentially told, bow down and worship me. All these kingdoms will be yours. There's this example after example.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what's interesting in a way is that Hollywood they're doing it for money reasons. They're doing it because they either consciously or unconsciously have been able to tap into patterns which people connect to. And so the most kind of anti-Christian director can put out a blockbuster movie which actually tells the story of Christ and or tells a story of at least a story that maps on to let's say the Christian story. And one of the movies that I talked about recently was the movie Logan, where there's so much symbolism of kind of the ascent up the mountain, and there's all this imagery of Moses, and there's even imagery of baptism, and all this stuff is there in the movie. But I mean, the people who made it are not Christian at all. Like, they're not interested in that stuff at all. But I think that what it shows is that this story, one of the things I tell people is that the story of Christ is really the story. We have come to the story, which kind of encapsulates all the story into one story, or all, let's say, the meaningful threads of storytelling into one story. And it's so big that people don't even see it. We're so used to hearing the story of Christ that we don't realize how every single detail of that story is replete with reference, and it also, you can expand it so much and go back into the Old Testament and show people how everything Christ says, everything Christ does is echoed in the Old Testament and brings it all together into his story. It's such an amazing story. And so it's kind of like, as the world becomes more anti-Christian, the underlying program of our society is still there, and people still need it. So they won't go to church, but they'll go see a movie in which the Christian theme is replayed over and over because it's not conscious. It really is this unconscious desire to connect with that story.
Film going as liturgical event. Think of it. It's dark. There's a prelude. There's music. It's kind of a quasi, almost a substitute worship, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that pejoratively.
Yeah, I would call it a liturgy of the narthex. I would say, in the sense that it's a type of art that someone, Aidan Hart, who's a British artist, he invented the term threshold art, which is art which can bring you to the threshold of the church. It's like a movie is still entertainment. It's not participative, let's say, like prayer or worship or liturgy is. It's still an entertainment, so you are removed from it, but it can bring you to the threshold. It can bring you to the door, and then you can experience the fullness, let's say, of the church coming together and participating in the story. Like when we participate in the liturgical year and when we participate in liturgy, it's not an entertainment. We are actively engaged in the story of Christ, which plays itself out during the year. So it gives you identity, and it gives you a place in the world.
So Christ as the Logos transcends his earthly life. Therefore, he can and did speak through prophets and through Old Testament events, because he's the Logos. That's my favorite word in the whole universe. I think if you look up the average Greek translation dictionary, there's going to be 5 pages of synonyms for Logos.
Yeah.
And it's
so charged. It's such a charged word.
It really is. It's meaning, order, intellect, design, coherence. And what do we call the Incarnation? There's even a movie about it from the 60s. It's not the nicest story ever told, or the second greatest. It's the greatest story ever told. So you would think, if that's the ultimate story, you could say, to baptize Jung a little bit, it's the only myth that historically happened in all its finesse of details.
Right.
You'd expect other stories, to greater and lesser degrees, to kind of tap into that exemplar story. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. Well, Tolkien and the C.S. Lewis, they used to say that. I mean, that's kind of how Tolkien converted Lewis, it seems, to say that the story of Christ is the myth that came true, in the sense that it is an incarnation of all the patterns of cosmic patterns into one event and one story, into one person. And so it is this condensation of everything into one thing. And I think that I mean, one of the purposes in my life is been to try to help people see that. And so I try to, I have a YouTube channel where I try to interpret movies. I try to talk about the strange things in the Bible which people don't understand, and try to show how all of this always connects to Christ. If you look at the Old Testament through the lens of Christ, a lot of the weird stuff actually starts to make sense, and you start to understand it.
You cited a line from an essay Camille Paglia wrote probably 10 or 15 years ago on religion and the arts. Let me. I'm normally allergic to reading because this is mostly a podcast, but let me go to the end of where you ended and read the next sentence, because it's germane to what we're talking about. She says, knowledge of the Bible, one of the West's foundational texts, is dangerously waning among aspiring young artists and writers. When a society becomes all consumed in the provincial minutiae of partisan politics, as has happened to us in the U.S. over the last 20 years, all perspective is lost. Great art can be made out of love for religion as well as rebellion against it. But a totally secularized society with contempt for religion sinks into materialism and self-absorption and gradually goes slack without leaving an artistic legacy.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. And that's the thing about these outliers like Camille Paglia. I think that she has gotten an extremely powerful insight into how the world works. And how the world works is that will always be marginal figures, and there are outliers and marginal figures, and rebels, and all these things are part of, let's say, the shape of the world. And in a way, sometimes they actually play a role in the world. But in order to play that role, they have to be what they are. In order to play the role that a holy fool can play, or a jester, or an irreverent person, you have to be on the margin and be looking inside and poking fun at it. If you completely destroy the thing you're making fun of, then you continue to say the things you were saying, you're no longer playing that role. You become a totalitarian person who just tries to then control what everybody thinks. And so she's kind of understood that even for her to exist as a kind of lesbian, transgender, radical feminist, in order for her to exist in that role, there has to be, let's say, the Catholic Church, or there has to be something which holds the straight path, let's say, which kind of pushes the straight way, so that she can be crooked on the side.
Yeah, and then she doesn't even know that she's playing an important role, exactly as she is exactly right now, because there's a kind of residual respect that she has for the Catholicism of her upbringing. You can tell there's a kind of a wistful, I won't elevate it to longing, but there's maybe a disappointment that things aren't as they were according to the promises that she grew up hearing about. I mean, she knows the Baltimore Catechism. She's very unusually versed in theology, and yet she in a different way from Milo, is kind of the court jester. Not an iconoclast. She's not trying to destroy things, but she's trying to point out foibles. From her perspective. It's very interesting.
It would be great it would be great if you were able to talk to her. That would be amazing. That would be really something.
I would love it. Yeah, I first heard of her through a theology professor of mine named Dr. Scott Hahn. He said, "You got to read Sexual Personae." What's that? And I did. And I got it. There's back to that twisted mystic idea.
Yeah.
Painting in broad strokes, would you say that as from a Christian art point of view, statues are more identified with Western Latin, and paintings and icons are more identified with Eastern and Orthodox? Is that a that is definitely a reality. It's actually difficult to know what the source of that difference is. Some people will try to point to some theological differences. Other people really, I think that the most reasonable way to see it is to point at iconoclasm as the reason why that happened. One quick definition for people who've never heard that phrase.
So during iconoclasm, there was this hostility towards images, and the emperors who were against icons, they actually went out and destroyed images. And so some images were preserved from that time, but we think that they were the smaller images that were able to kind of be tucked under, little icons were able to be put under something, or, hidden in your clothing. But whatever statues were in Constantinople were smashed, and so the idea is, we don't know how much statuary was there before, but for sure after Iconoclasm, it feels like either the Byzantines did not want to have statuary to not provoke, let's say, not exaggerate for those that still had iconoclastic ideas, or because this idea of the image as representation, they ended up kind of going more towards painting and also relief carving. So that became the tradition of the Eastern Church, whereas in the West, they didn't have the iconoclasm problem, and so they just kind of developed their things on their own and continued on to develop their own tradition. And so by the time the schism happened and then things kind of started splitting apart, some Orthodox people started to interpret that statues were Western, and so there actually became a time where there was an active hostility towards statues. And so that's just kind of how it happened. Yeah.
Right. Well, your carvings, seems to me, are a bridge between the two worlds. What's a carving but a less 3D statue?
Right. Well, I think,
bas relief and so on,
Yeah. I don't have a problem with statues. I make statues as well, but I usually make them for Catholic patrons. And it's not, for me, it's not a theological problem. It's mostly a problem of tradition, in terms of there's no point in making things to offend the people you're making them for, or to annoy people that you're making them for.
Recipe for success.
Exactly. And so, Orthodox prefer painted icons or low relief icons for whatever reason. And so I love those works too. And so I'm happy to make that for them. And then when Catholics ask me for statuaries once in a while, then I have no problem making that. If an Orthodox person were to ask me for a statue for their parish, to be honest, I would probably ask a lot of questions before I would say, like, why do you want a statue? Is that okay with your parish council? Have you talked to your priest? Have you talked to your bishop? Not because I think it's wrong, but just because of what I said. Why would you try to provoke some kind of and it's really a different approach than, let's say, modern art has been, which has been constantly this desire to provoke reaction and to provoke surprise and to provoke innovation. And when you make traditional art, you don't have that same impetus, let's say. You're trying to create a family member. You're trying to create something which will feel like home, which will participate easily in the life and the person, and won't distract them from the original purpose, which is to show Christ, to show the apostles, to show the saints. That's what we're trying to do.
Hilaire Belloc described Islam as a heresy, because it borrows so much from Catholicism, even fasting and the divine office and the praying 5 times a day, the importance of going to the worship space once a week and so on. And I can't help but think, in light of that observation that Islam is a kind of a heresy, how similar it is to Protestantism in this iconoclastic thing, this allergy to something visual, to something depicted, as opposed to the written words. You've got sola scriptura on the one hand, and then on the other hand, in the Islamic world, you've got this strong taboo against depicting Allah or Muhammad. Have you ever pondered the parallel there?
No, definitely. When the Protestants encountered the Eastern, priests and the Eastern bishops, and the way they interpreted was saying, these people are like Muslims. They saw Protestants in that lens. They saw Protestants as using the same types of arguments and the same types of approach that Muslims would take. So I agree, definitely.
And you think about the small proportion of people in this world today who are illiterate, and reverse engineer that, and imagine. Here's Gutenberg, one other son of Germany, who comes along just in time for Martin Luther to appear and produces the printing press and the proliferation of the written word of God. Then the very term word of God became over-identified with those books, rather than with Jesus Christ,
With
the
the
Logos
verse.
made flesh.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have to think that millions more people are in heavenly glory who couldn't read a lick of any language because of statues and stained glass windows and icons and carvings, because they're beautiful and because they're so fitting to use as catechetical tools, not to instrumentalize them, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. But I think that the question is far more profound than that. I mean, the question, one of the difficulties, let's say, with the Protestant movement, in my opinion, is that it lacked this perception, this ontological connection of the Incarnation. They lacked to see the Incarnation as this union of God and man, this union of heaven and earth, which transforms the way that the world actually exists. And so, it's not just a question of morality and I mean, it is a question of morality and ethics, but it's not just a question of morality and ethics and sin and sacrifice and let's say paying for the price, all that stuff. It's not just about that. It is also about this union of heaven and earth and the filling of the earth with the presence of God. And so that's the reason why we have images. The reason why we have images is because we can say, yes, it is possible to see God to the extent that we can see Jesus Christ. We can't see God in his divine nature. We can't see the Father, but we can see Christ as he has become man. And so the image of man itself has become capable, once again, as it was in the beginning, of showing us God to the extent that that's possible. And that's more than just a kind of legal argument. It's an argument about what are the implications of the Incarnation itself. And out of that comes everything else. That's why traditional Christianity has architecture that is thought out and is built in order to become, let's say, that the form matches the function, and that the way we build the church matches the theology. That's why all our music does that. It's not just painting or icons. It's the whole liturgical life, which takes upon itself the implication that God fills the world, and we can see that lay itself out within the church in terms of materiality. The material world is not bad. It can be baptized and transformed and participate in the glory of God.
Matter matters.
Matter matters, yeah.
I've been pondering the definition. I'm kind of a big verbophile. I love etymology. And the word culture, the three main meanings of culture, cultura in Latin, or cultus, the cognate means to till, in the sense of to cultivate, but also to worship. And whenever I go to Italy, I'm going to be there in April, as you and I were talking, so a month out, I'm always astounded at how this residual Christian civilization that was nurtured for centuries by the gospel is still there in the form of the way buildings are shaped, and I mean banks and secular buildings, even down to details like public garbage cans. I mean, here in the States, and I grew up in Nova Scotia. I went to McGill, so I know Canadian. It's different but similar. But still, a garbage can is just a garbage can. It's just something to hold garbage. But in post-Christian Europe, there are these ornate, wrought iron handles, and there's detail, and it's almost like the architects who built all these external objects for human use are doing it because they know that the beings that observe it and use it are made in God's image and likeness, and therefore have great dignity. They're King's children. So don't just have a functional boxy thing. Make it ornate, make it beautiful, because there's an inherent dignity in the people who are using it. Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. And I think that's one of the strengths that we can have right now, let's say as Christians, is to bring that to light and to show people how ugly, the modern world is, and just how it is devoid of scale in terms of its human connection, how it's devoid of centers, how it's devoid of places where people can meet, and all these things are a consequence of secular thinking brought to its limit. And so and people have nostalgia. People go to visit cities. They go to visit the churches. Even people who aren't Christian. People come to Montreal, and they're lining up in front of the Notre Dame Basilica, and it's not even an old church. It's like it's like not even 100 years old, I think. But they line up and they visit the church because we have this nostalgia for a certain type of manifestation in the world, a certain type of encounter, and we can't find that in the contemporary world. We can't find that in contemporary architecture and contemporary city planning. All those things are gone, and I think that it is an important symptom of secularism and something that we can point out as Christians when we're talking with people.
Mm-hmm. How did being in Africa for 7 years represent a change-up of your artistic lens when you came back?
Well, I worked when I was in Africa. I was in Africa with my family for 7 years, and we worked with artisans there. And so we were really involved in the making of things and, making practical things for life, making furniture, making things for the house, making trivets to hold hot pots, very, very grounded things. But we were working with the artisans to help them connect, let's say, traditional styles, traditional languages that were developed in Africa, and then connect them with these modern objects. And I think that what it did, because coming from the art world, coming from studying art, art is a mental thing. It's barely in the world. They always see the technical aspect of it as almost kind of dirty and something you don't want to talk about too much. What you really want to talk about are the concepts and the ideas. But for me, living with people who were making things in the world really helped me to see the need for the connectedness of an object. And that's why coming back and investing myself in liturgical art made sense, because the thing about liturgical art or traditional Christian art is that it doesn't just reach high. It doesn't only talk about lofty things and talk about, have a metaphysical language, but it's also completely grounded in the world. It's not just for your viewing. It's not just for your entertainment or for your let's say, aesthetic pleasure, although it will provide that, but it's also something which anchors, which participates in the life of people. It's up on a wall in a church, and when you're walking into the church, you see all these people, you see the painting, it reminds you of a story that maybe the priest will talk about, and so it's connecting all things together. And in terms of actual objects, because I make, reliquaries and I make processional crosses and all these things, those things are taken and brought out and participate in the liturgy, and so they're totally grounded in the life of a community. And I think that it's like what you talked about when you talked about the idea of a beautiful trash can, is that the modern world or the contemporary world is really this de-incarnation. It really is this idea of very, very abstract ideas and a kind of very efficient, practical world, but we don't connect them together. We have separated we've ripped the world apart. And so when we see something that's incarnational, even if it is, like you said, a beautiful trash can or a beautiful garden or even a normal proportion in architecture, where there's this kind of traditional proportion of how it lays itself out, then we feel something. It connects to our humanity. It connects to our desire to be connected to others, and so it's a very powerful thing.
De-incarnational. I like that. I'm totally stealing that with proper attribution, of course. You're still the editor of the Orthodox Arts Journal?
Yes, although I don't have a lot of time to put on that, but we're still plowing through.
Sure. Well, I feel like, Jonathan, we've just scratched the white part of the surface of the eggshell here, to use a Russian icon symbol. I'll have to send goons out to force you to return to the show. I really enjoyed our time. I wish I had more time. I just feel like there's so many more tributaries off the river we can explore. Will we come back sometime in the future?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Anytime.
Great.
Anytime.
All right. Fantastic. Well, merci beaucoup. It's an honor to talk to you.
Yay. Thanks a lot.
Okay, very good. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Go to the show notes, patrickcoffin.media, and I'll show you the links to Jonathan's work and also the Orthodox Arts Journal. Pageau Carvings, by the way, Pageau carvings.com. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?